Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into, well, a pretty fundamental question about existence itself. Does the universe evolve towards its physical form mainly because of some inherent physical drive for order, for stability? Or does it need something else, like a prior activation, maybe even a will coming from a realm of pre-existent knowledge? It's a fascinating question that arises from the source material we're looking at. I'll be arguing that yes, physical existence is primarily driven by the universe's own intrinsic tendency towards order and stability, governed by basic physical and informational rules.
And I'll be taking the contrasting view. My argument is that for existence, causality, even time itself to become active, there needs to be a prior step, an activation, if you will, from a timeless realm of pre-existent knowledge, almost like a conceptual choice that makes potential reality actual.
Right. So my position is that the universe's emergence, its evolution, it's fundamentally driven by this inherent physical push towards order and stability. The source material actually gives us this really powerful unifying idea. It says, quote, "The physical drive for a system to find the path of least action is identical to the informational drive for that system to find its state of maximum order, minimum entropy." Now, that's not some external force pushing things around. It's presented as an intrinsic property of reality itself. We see this baked into what the text calls the master equation, both the Euler-Lagrange equation, which, is the math describing how physical systems always find the most efficient path, basically nature optimizing itself, and this informational term representing maximum order or negentropy. They both naturally head towards zero in a perfect equilibrium state. This really shows nature inherently looking for stability, looking for order through its most basic physical and informational laws. The text even describes the beginning, epoch zero, as this perfect, silent, and infinite reality, a kind of timeless, perfectly ordered crystal of pure information. Then comes the big pop. It wasn't triggered by an external decision, according to the text, but by a single random quantum fluctuation, a tiny probabilistic event, consistent with quantum mechanics. That fluctuation then kicked off a chain reaction of physical events, energy flooding into a vacuum, forming what it calls EM springs, then quarks, neutrons, hydrogen atoms, all guided, it says, by the master curvature equation and a holographic blueprint information for the universe, meant to guide the universe evolve from chaos to order. So the picture here is of a self-organizing system. It's driven by its own internal principles towards complexity and order.
Okay, I see that line of reasoning, but I approach this from a different angle. I argue that making our universe manifest, making it active, requires a crucial step, an activation that goes beyond just an inherent physical tendency. My view really centers on the material's core assertion that absolute nothingness is impossible. Now, that's not just a philosophical aside. The text says this impossibility directly implies the existence of anything, a pure potential zero entropy realm. And what this means, crucially, is that all forms of existence already exist in the form of a cumulative knowledge outside the time boundary. Now, that immediately challenges the idea of a purely physical beginning. If existence, described as a static map of all possibilities, eternal mathematical equation, is inevitable, then the real question is, what breathes life into it? What gives life to this static map? Time is the only way to activate the law of causation and give life to such eternal equation. So, without this activation step, all those possibilities are just latent. They are not active. Furthermore, the text tackles the problem of infinite regression of causation. The idea that every cause needs a prior cause going back forever. It says that's impossible. Therefore, it concludes it must be a decision has been made for initial condition and state. It even suggests a fundamental logical choice between 0 and 1, where 0 is that impossible nothingness and 1 represents all infinite possibilities. This choice, this decision, leads to all possible existences at once. To me, that strongly implies an act of will, a fundamental choice, not just a physical unfolding. And critically, the text adds that when time and causality are activated, will, consciousness, and awareness of prior knowledge are existing too. It even identifies this with the divinity or singularity based on your background. This suggests these aren't just later products of evolution, but are intrinsically tied to the very act of activating reality itself. It points to a deeper conceptual event bringing the universe into being.
I see why you're focusing on that pre-existent knowledge and the impossibility of nothingness, suggesting this sort of conceptual blueprint. But let me offer maybe a different read on that initial state and how the blueprint manifests. The material describes Epoch Zero as that timeless, perfectly ordered crystal of pure information. Okay, so that state is the realm of pure potential you mentioned, the zero entropy state. The Big Pop is specifically identified as a single random quantum fluctuation. It created, it says, a tiny flaw, a pocket of nothing inside a universe of everything. Now, I don't read that as a conscious decision. It sounds much more like a natural, probabilistic event, something perfectly in line with quantum mechanics. It's the universe, in a way, acting upon itself. And as the text suggests, nature abhors a true vacuum. So what happens? The infinite energy and information of the surrounding crystal immediately began to pour into this empty bubble, trying to fill it and restore the universe to its perfect state. So this mechanism explains the shift from potential to manifest reality purely through inherent physical dynamics. The blueprint in this view isn't some external thing waiting to be activated by a will. It is the intrinsic informational structure of Epoch Zero itself, which then dynamically unfolds, it self-organizes once it's perturbed by that quantum event.
That's an interesting framing of the quantum fluctuation. And yes, I agree, Epoch Zero is described as that perfect crystal of information. But I think the context for that fluctuation is key, and that's where we differ. The statement that absolute nothingness is impossible comes before the fluctuation is mentioned, setting the stage. It happens within this pure potential zero entropy realm, where again, all forms of existence already exist in the form of accumulative knowledge outside the time boundary. So for me, this suggests the fluctuation isn't just a random event happening in a vacuum, so to speak. It's occurring within a pre-existing field of timeless possibilities. And then the text brings in this idea of a simple logical choice between 0 or 1, leading to all existences. Now, this implies that the random quantum fluctuation isn't just pure uncaused randomness without any backdrop.
It's more like the activation of one possibility from that pre-existent field, a fundamental choice, you could say, to move from the impossible 0 to the potential 1, representing all infinite possibilities. That choice, I think, is distinct from just the physical bump. It's what actually inaugurates the active universe. It kicks things off from the static, timeless conceptual blueprint. It's the conceptual shift needed before the physical unfolding can even begin.
Okay, I hear you emphasizing that logical choice, that activation of possibility. But I struggle to square that with the idea that time seems so fundamentally woven into the universe's inherent physical workings. I mean, the shortest and fastest path verification section in the material, it explicitly states the Euler-Lagrange equation describes how a physical system will always evolve from one state to another by following the path that minimizes action. Now, that evolution, moving from one state to another, that, by definition, involves time. You can't talk about a path between states without talking about temporal progression. And the story of the universe part elaborates on this, right? It describes space-time itself evolving through these quantized epochs. Epoch I, one-dimensional space-time, epoch II, two-dimensional space, and so on. So time doesn't seem like some external activator that flips a switch for existence.
It looks more like a fundamental dimension within which the universe's own drive towards stability and order operates and manifests. It seems like an emergent property of the universe's self-organizing principles, not something that needs to be switched on by some prior will or decision. Right, I understand the point about time being integral to physical evolution, once it's running, but I just can't quite reconcile that with the material's very explicit statement that time is generative for causation, not just descriptive of it. The text clearly says, while time is just a concept, all existence are just a static map of all possibilities, eternal mathematical equation. And then, critically, time is the only way to activate the law of causation and give life to such eternal equation. That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? If existence is already there as accumulative knowledge outside the time boundary, this static map, then time's role isn't just describing how things move on the map. It's what makes the map dynamic in the first place. It initiates the unfolding. It's the mechanism turning the static into the dynamic, the potential into the actual. And remember the issue of infinite regression and causation? The text says that's only resolved by this inevitable existence, which then makes necessary a decision for initial condition and state. So this decision comes before the causal chain starts ticking. Therefore, time, as I read it, is presented as a chosen mechanism, a fundamental parameter that gets activated, allowing cause and effect to actually happen, and actualizing that pre-existing conceptual reality. Without that activation, the universe just remains a timeless, static potential.
I appreciate that distinction you're drawing, the generative role of time. But I'd argue that even the decision you highlight could be seen as a consequence of the universe's intrinsic properties rather than some external volitional act. Look, the order we see everywhere doesn't necessarily require a separate activating will. It seems to arise organically from the unified theory the text presents, where that physical drive for least action is identical to the informational drive for minimum entropy. It talks about the universe boundary surface dynamically updating a holographic blueprint information for the universe whose purpose is to guide the universe evolve from chaos to order. Now, that doesn't sound like an external intelligence imposing order. It sounds more like the blueprint itself is an emergent, self-correcting property of the universe. It intrinsically links physics and information together without needing a prior will or a conscious being in the way you seem to suggest. The material even says, physics are the material science of reality and objects, and that using physics actually creates more order, concepts. This looks like a feedback loop, a self-generating, self-ordering intelligence that's embedded within the system right from the start. It seems like a fundamental property of reality itself, not a choice imposed upon it.
That's certainly a compelling case for the universe's self-organizing power through its own laws. But have you maybe not fully weighed the implication that the very activation of time and causality, according to the text, also leads to the coexistence of will, consciousness, and awareness of prior knowledge? That points to something I think more fundamental than these things just emerging later from complex physics. They're presented as being intrinsically tied to the very act of bringing existence into being, not just a downstream consequence. If, as it says, concepts are the material science of knowledge, and we use concepts to understand physics order, well, that suggests the conceptual realm has a foundational, maybe even a primary role. And then the text introduces relativistic entropy as the artificial order we made or perceive as conscious being. This indicates that our conceptual ordering, and by extension consciousness itself, plays a defining role in shaping and interpreting the universe we experience. And importantly, the text explicitly connects this activation process to the notion of a conscious being or divinity. So this isn't just about an emergent blueprint guiding physics. It seems to point towards a foundational intelligence that initiates the conditions for reality, including our ability to perceive order. It feels less like a purely physical drive and more like a conceptual one that precedes and enables the physical.
Okay, I can see how you'd interpret will, consciousness, and awareness appearing alongside time and causality that way. But I wonder if that might be conflating the eventual emergent properties of complex systems with a foundational, deliberate act of will. While the material notes they coexist, it doesn't necessarily force the conclusion of a prior decision-making entity. Couldn't we argue that as the universe evolves from epoch zero's pure information state through increasing complexity, eventually reaching states complex enough to support consciousness, that these very capacities for will and awareness become manifest as part of the universe's inherent self-ordering process? The holographic blueprint information is there to guide the universe from chaos to order. Maybe that means the potential for consciousness and will is encoded within that blueprint from the start, and it simply unfolds as the universe develops, rather than being an external activator. And the idea of relativistic entropy being the order we perceive, well, that could just highlight our role as observers arising within that self-generated order, not necessarily proving the presence of a pre-existent, conscious decider at the universe's origin. Our perception itself is a product of the universe's evolving complexity, right?
Well, I'd have to respectfully disagree that will and consciousness are merely emergent properties unfolding later.
The specific phrasing in the text that they are existing to right when time and causality are activated suggests to me a much more fundamental connection, a concurrent co-creation perhaps, or maybe even a causal link, where activating time and causation itself necessitates the presence of these conceptual attributes. If, as the text states, all forms of existence already exist in the form of accumulated knowledge outside the time boundary, then surely that knowledge, those possibilities, aren't just inert data. They represent a kind of conceptual activity. That logical choice between 0 or 1 feels less like a physical fluctuation and more like a conceptual one. And that foundational choice or decision, I argue, is precisely where will, consciousness, and awareness of prior knowledge come into play, not as some late-stage outcome of complex physics, but as integral to the very act of translating potential into active reality. The divinity or singularity mentioned in that context doesn't sound like just a complex physical system. It sounds like the conceptual source that makes such a system possible in the first place, the origin of the decision that animates the static map of possibilities through time.
So we've explored two pretty profound perspectives on what fundamentally drives existence. On one side, my argument, an inherent physical drive towards order and stability, rooted in this elegant unification of action and information principles. This suggests a self-organizing universe. The Big Pop, in this view, is a natural quantum event kicking off a cosmic evolution guided by an internal blueprint, moving from chaos to order, with consciousness and will emerging naturally as part of that complex unfolding.
And on the other side, my perspective, arguing for an activation that stems from pre-existent knowledge. This view posits that absolute existence, as this accumulated knowledge, actually precedes time and causality. And time, then, isn't just a dimension for things to happen in. It's the fundamental activator, the result, perhaps, of a logical choice or decision that brings dynamic life to an otherwise static map of possibilities. And crucially, this activation is fundamentally linked, from the very beginning, with will and consciousness.
Right. Both viewpoints draw heavily on the source material we have, offering, I think, robust and evidence-based ways to think about the universe's origin and how it continues to exist. What seems clear is that the material really pushes us to consider, is the universe fundamentally a self-starter, organizing itself through its own inherent laws, or does it require something more profound, perhaps a conceptual spark, to bring its potential into active being?
Exactly. These are nuanced positions, and they invite us to really think about the complex dance between physics, information, potentiality, and yes, the nature of consciousness itself, right at the deepest level of reality. The material definitely suggests there's more to explore here in trying to reconcile these compelling, though different, lines of reasoning. It certainly challenges us to rethink some basic assumptions about how reality works.